Strategic Affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. On the talking point this week, we're looking at NSA Ajit Doval's meetings in the US with Ambassador Arun Singh. A warm welcome to all those viewers who are picking up this live stream, and welcome to those viewers who will watch this later on our YouTube channel. Ambassador Arun Singh, the former India ambassador to the US, to France, to Israel, joins us. Good to see you, Ambassador, after a while.
Thanks, Amitabh. Good to see you too.
The NSA's visit, the meetings, and ICET, there's been a lot of analysis since then about it giving an impetus to, I think one of US official was quoted as saying the next big things after the civil nuclear deal in the US-India partnership. What's your reading, Ambassador?
No, I think it's certainly a very major development because if you recall, post 2000 and post the sanctions US had brought on us after our nuclear test in 1998, the first major step to bring about a new relationship between India and the US was the 2004 statement on next steps in strategic partnership. And that laid out a program of cooperation in cutting edge areas, then space, nuclear, defense. And based on that, there was progress in different areas. It led to what has often been described as a landmark agreement between the two countries, the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008. And that essentially ended nuclear apartheid for India. And India could access materials like uranium, civil nuclear power, and technology from other countries. So that was a very important step. Because if you notice, before that, the US hardly did any defense supplies to India. But since then, India has contracted to buy more than $20 billion worth of defense supplies to the US. So it opened up opportunities for technology partnership, technology access in different areas. Now, from that moment, there has been progress. For example, the US declared India a major defense partner in the Obama administration. In the Trump administration, the US placed India on Strategic Trade Authorization Level 1, giving India access to technology similar to its NATO partners, and therefore higher levels of technology. But there was no major new framework for developing cooperation between the two countries. And I think to that extent, what has been done now through decisions related to partnership on critical and emerging technologies sets a new framework. Because it has been argued that the newer technologies that are coming in, artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotechnology, space, semiconductors, all these are going to completely transform the way we live, the way we work. And in many of these areas, there is only initial work happening in any country in the world, including the US and of course in India. So if we can build a new partnership focusing on these areas of technology, it has, of course, the potential to be of advantage to India because India would be working in cutting edge technology areas with important partners. And it would also have the potential to deepening the partnership because, our trade with the US, for example, is $160 billion. US is India's largest trading partner. But for US, India is the 9th or 10th largest trading partner. And if you look at the US-China trade, it's more than $650 billion. So the trade and economic relationship between India and US is not quite up to the level that is being projected as the strategic convergence between the two countries. So I think there was a need to look at opportunities for deepening the economic and technology partnership. So this provides that. But then I must make a point of caution. Although a new framework, new messaging, a new declaration of intent is there, the real challenge will be to implement what has been decided. Because if we are not able to do that, then of course we will not be able to make progress.
Sure. You've gone into the genesis of the frameworks in terms of India-US relations. But can you trace a little bit more for how and why this initiative uh, kind of has got front stage now? I mean, May 2022, I think the Biden Modi meet in Tokyo was when it was first publicized.
Mhm. So, from the comments I see that have come out in the public and from some of the conversations I have, my understanding is that some thinking along these lines started around the middle of 2021. And there was a sense, one, of course, as I mentioned, that although there's growing strategic convergence between India and the US, more needs to be done to deepen the economic and technology partnership. I think the second, there was a sense that we are not able to make progress or bringing about new trade agreements between the two countries. And you've been hearing for more than 4 years that we are trying for a small trade agreement and that it will be done soon, but it has not happened. And I think it has not happened, one, because there are existing interests on both sides based on the current pattern of production. So that whenever you try and work out new trading arrangement, the existing interests feel that their interests are threatened, and they, start discussing how their interests could be protected in any kind of new trading agreement that is worked out, and that stalls progress. And the two countries have not been able to make any advances in that. Even in the U.S., as you know, there is a negative sentiment related to trade agreements from the time of the Trump administration, because they have felt that with the kind of trade agreements that they did in the past, jobs were sucked out of the US, and the US middle class, the 30-40% of the population, was seeing their wages stagnate, unemployment rates were going up. So if we are not able to work out new trading agreements based on existing pattern of production, then perhaps there is a need to build new areas of cooperation, new frameworks of interaction, develop new patterns of production, and then work out some trading arrangement, norms and standards pertaining to those that are benefit to both countries. So that was one thinking, and therefore one way to do that was to initiate cooperation in the newer areas of technology that were emerging. And then, as you know, in many of these areas, China has been doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
And there is a sense in the US that if they want to meet the China challenge, then given the numbers that China brings to the table, 1.4 billion people, they can meet the Chinese challenge if they also partner with India in technology, because India has strengths and numbers in human resources. So from the US perspective, they see is India as an important partner in this context. Also, as you know, people have been making the argument now for several years that these newer technologies, there's a perfect storm of technology being developed with AI, quantum, 6G, newer areas in space, commercial utilization of space, semiconductors, which is going to completely transform, the way we live, the way we work. And therefore, why don't we start cooperating in those areas? So I think it is in that framework that my sense is discussions began between the two governments, which led to the joint statement that was issued by President Biden and Prime Minister Modi in May 2022, where they directed the two governments to begin cooperation in these areas and directed the National Security Councils to start work. And I think there the reason was that since you're dealing with a whole range of subjects, you need some important coordinating agencies. Also, in cutting edge technology areas, there would be concerns on both sides, including in the US, whether you see the other country as an acceptable partner in cutting edge technology areas and not as a national security threat. So if there was a message coming from the national security establishments of both the countries that they see each other as important partners, as acceptable partners in these areas of technology, then the private sector and the academia would be more willing to partner with each other in these areas. Otherwise, they would be concerned. Now, if you look at the United States, for example, many US companies or many US universities that were partnering with Chinese entities have now had to back off, and they've come under export controls, and they've been told to not partner with US universities, for example, in cutting edge research. So they would like to be reassured that when they partner with India in these areas, the US system, the US establishment, the national security establishment is supportive of that. So I think to that extent, the meeting that happened in Washington, and you saw there was a meeting, a 1.5 track kind of meeting, where the two national security advisors, the US Commerce Secretary and senior officials on both sides, interacted with industry and academia from both countries, therefore conveying clear message that they are supportive of industry level and academic level partnership and cooperation in these areas. So I think that's an important message. So that, to my sense, is the genesis of how it has all evolved, an explanation of the potential. But again, as we discussed, to really take this forward, one is implementation, and second, only the government cannot do it. Industry and academia on both sides need to cooperate, because in many of these areas, even the industry, to move forward, needs cooperation from the academia. So it's a partnership that has to be developed step by step.
A quick message to our viewers: if you like this interview and the subject, do hit the thumbs up button on YouTube and share the link to this video as widely as possible. And the big headline catchers back home, at least, were the mention of the General Electric engine. Now, from your understanding of what's been put out in the public domain, is this just production in India, or does it have the potential for a gradual or total transfer of technology? I mean, France's Safran is also in the mix, apparently.
So, we'll, right now I can only base my comments on what's come out in the public domain and in the media. And from that, what I see is that the proposal is not just for production in India, but also a transfer of technology, which would make it an important development. And again, if you recall, US and India had set up a defense trade and technology initiative, which started in 2014. And that was not able to make much progress in the area of jet engine technology, because what India's expectation was something the US was not then ready to authorize, either the government or the private sector or both. So now there is a sense that the US sees that the relationship with India has evolved. US sees India as an important partner in terms of the challenges it faces, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And therefore, US is now willing to share higher levels of technology. Now, beyond that, of course, the devil will be in the detail as to specifically what is the level of technology that the US is willing to authorize transfer in the areas of jet engine technology, which is really cutting edge. And from what I had heard earlier, that one area where the US has not allowed transfer to any country, including its NATO partners, is the hot section of the engine. Now, the question is whether that would be transferred now or other areas would be transferred, and we have to see what eventually emerges.
And it's good in a way that, I mean, if reports are correct, that the French Safran is also giving a competition in a sense. Again, there have been renewed reports of the MQ-9B drone deal. I mean, the Navy has already leased 2 Sea Guardians, which have been used intensively and extensively, reportedly even near the LAC. But if the figures are correct, $3 billion, 30 of them, isn't that too expensive? How does that fit in with the Make in India Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative?
So again, that's a decision that the Ministry of Defense and the users have to make, that in terms of cost-benefit analysis, how important it is, how quickly they need it. But my sense is that whatever deal is done will certainly involve production in India and also some transfer of technology. But beyond that, the cost-benefit analysis can only be done by the users.
Just going to take some viewer questions. V. Chitnis asks, given the vast power asymmetry, military, economic, and technology between India and the US, how realistic is it to expect a genuine partnership from the US? Isn't India better served by partnering with more amenable middle powers? I'm not sure who Chitnis means in terms of giving high tech.
So there, the first question would be, do any other powers have the level of technology that the US has? So that's something we have to keep in mind. Second thing we must keep in mind is that partnership with the US also gets us some strategic heft. Because if the US is seen as partnering with India, many other allies and partners of the US are willing to do more with India. And that is something that I experience in my work I did in different countries. So that's an additional advantage that you certainly get through this. And then the final thing you should keep in mind is that I don't think we should really be wary of our not being able to fully exploit the opportunity just because there is a power asymmetry. Now, if you look at China, for example, it started its partnership with the US in 1980. And at that time, there was a huge power asymmetry between US and China. And yet, China was able to leverage its cooperation with the US and technology access to the US to build its strengths tremendously. So, my own sense would be that if we are confident and if we are able to work the partnership to our advantage, we will certainly be able to use the opportunity that is there without really being worried about our forsaking our interests, national interest in any way.
Another one, Ambassador, from Pradyuman Ravi, who says, how reliable and sustainable will ICET be in fostering strategic technology partnerships and defense industrial cooperation in the long run when America perceives India as a strategic competitor? I think it's a very long run.
Well, as of now, the US has said clearly and signaled clearly that it does not see India as a strategic competitor. Now, one can never predict what happens 30, 40, 50 years down the line. But at the moment, in terms of all the US messaging and analysis, they see China as their main rival. And they see China as the only country in the world with the economic, technological capability, military capability, and intent to challenge the US and try and change the rules that exist for international cooperation, including in the Indo-Pacific. So the US certainly does not see India as a strategic competitor. In fact, for this time frame in international relations, it sees India as a very important partner in terms of meeting the challenges that the US faces, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. So I think in many ways, the reason the US is more forthcoming in sharing increasingly higher levels of technology with India is because it sees it as a partner. And then again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, if the US is to meet the challenge from China, economic and technological challenge from China, it will need the partnership with India in terms of the human capital that India brings to the table with more than 1.4 billion people in India. And if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, the number of Indian CEOs in major US companies, Indian origin CEOs. And I visited Silicon Valley several times when I was ambassador, and I could see there that Indian origin tech entrepreneurs, Indian origin tech workers, Indian origin CEOs were not marginal. They were an integral part of US global leadership in innovation, including in digital technologies. And then again, in many areas, including in defense, including in cutting edge technology, there is a lot of R&D work happening in India for US companies. And so they get the work done here because they find it is productive, it is cost effective. Of course, the IP then is of the US company. It's not IP that is widely available in India, but the work is happening in India. So there is a framework in which the US finds the India relationship as useful for them. And of course, we have to see how we leverage that more for the wider societal and economic benefit in India.
Girish K asks, Ambassador, how do you think Russia will see ICET? He has a separate question on Russia's oil offer to Pakistan, but how do you see the Russians reacting, if at all?
We build our relationship with each country based on our national interest. And I don't think it is an either or situation. Because you develop a relationship with one country doesn't mean you don't develop with the other. And you'd have seen that over the past 1 year, the US has taken a certain position related to Russia. And India, because of its own interests, has not agreed with the US position. And in terms of our defense cooperation with Russia, there's been no backing off. In terms of our energy requirements, we have in fact increased the purchases from Russia many times. So it is India that has to decide that in different areas, how is India's national security interests, the interests of the Indian people, how are they met, and take decisions based on that. And that's how each country works.
And as you said, it's really wide-ranging when you're talking about critical and emerging technologies, semiconductors, AI, as you mentioned, quantum tech, advanced wireless, 5G, 6G, even a space training of an astronaut with NASA was discussed. And usually we go in whole hog. Our space programs have been linked to Russia.
No, and well, there's been a lot of cooperation with the US also.
Okay.
There is partnership with Russia, but there's partnership with France in space. Many of
Yep.
our satellite launches take place from French Guiana. So there is a lot of partnership with France, but there has been ongoing partnership with the US. For example, the two countries are working on the NISAR satellite, which will be launched, I think, in 2024 for mapping Earth and water surfaces. So there is cooperation. But I think one important dimension beyond the lunar mission that you mentioned and astronauts is that there is an effort through the new mechanism to deepen cooperation between the private sector of the two countries in space. Because as you know, in India, an effort has been made now for some years to deepen the role of the private sector in space. There are very important strengths in the startup sector in India in space. And so that is being encouraged. And many of them are already partnering with US companies in this area. So if we are able to deepen the strength of the Indian private sector in this area, also develop the partnership with the US private sector, I think that will open a whole new area of possibilities in terms of space-based commercial and other applications.
As you mentioned, in India hasn't even been able to reach, or India and the US, I should say, India has not been able to reach even a limited FTA or any kind of trade deal. The fact that national security establishments of both countries are the lead agencies for everything that's been given out, say, even in the White House fact sheet, does that make a huge difference in the implementation?
Well, I think there is a signal here. The first signal is that because these are cutting edge areas covering a whole range of ministries, departments on both sides, in different agencies, different laboratories, you needed to bring in some agency that can coordinate all this. So that was required. Second, in the US system and also in other countries, including India, any message that comes out from the National Security Council is certainly taken seriously in the sense that that's a coordinated message from the government. Plus, in terms of our national security concerns and interests, it is seen as a priority. And I think especially in today's context, because these are cutting edge technology areas, the US industry and US academia would need to be assured that if they partner with India in these areas, they are not going to run into problems, because many of them were blocked from such cooperation with other countries, including with China recently. So I think right in the beginning, once they get this message, it will certainly accelerate the kind of cooperation that would be built up. So from that perspective, I think it's important that the National Security Council of both the countries have been involved in this.
And again, semiconductors, Anirudh Krishnan says, how does that fit in within the India-US dialogue? And will the US assist India building in this sector? There is talk about fabrication, but I don't know, again, as you say, implementation.
So, if you see the fact sheet that was put out by the White House after this meeting, and also the statement that was issued by the Indian side after this meeting, there's a clear reference in both of them that cooperation in designing, manufacture, fabrication, semiconductors will be an important area of partnership. So now that's a signal from the two governments. Now the private sectors need to step in. And again, as you know, in India, over the past year or so, huge effort has been made to get this semiconductor ecosystem active and flourishing in India. So if we are able, and for that also India needs partnership with other countries, because that's where the technologies are at the moment. There's been conversation with different countries in the world for this. So I think a message from the US to their private sector that they see partnership with India in this area, something that they're willing to encourage, I think will have an important impact. Of course, from then on, the private sector of the two countries have to discuss and work out how it works for each of them in terms of profit and other opportunity.
A bunch of China-related questions. I'll just take them all on, and you can just take them all into consideration. Rajesh Syal says India needs high-tech weapons to stop China's aggression. Matara asks news of a Chinese spy balloon over Montana. The excuses for not shooting down the balloons seem silly. What's going on? Uh, Blinken's apparently going on the weekend to Beijing. Matara again saying, why is the US sending mixed signals vis-a-vis China? And Indian Tides wants to understand what kind of capability addition do we get against China? I understand the argument related to Indian Ocean capability, but how are we tilting the scale as we lack industrial capacity?
So I think the first effort is, I mean, at the background, clearly, I would say China is the elephant in the room. But nobody will say that it is because of China that you're doing this cooperation. But I think from US perspective, they see that a stronger India will be in itself, even if it does not take any kind of an overt anti-Chinese position, in itself will be a natural constraint on China in terms of China trying to assert itself in the region. So that's one aspect. And I think from India's perspective, aside from other dimensions, through this kind of cooperation with the US, if we are able to build our own capacity, our own technological capacity, to build more economic strength in India, it works to our benefit. Now, anything that can then enable us to more effectively meet the Chinese challenge is a further spin-off. So I think that should be kept in mind, that that's not the only objective. The first objective is to build India's strength in itself, because that would be of benefit to the people. So I think that's the dimension in which this kind of cooperation is being approached. And I think that's how we should look at it.
Kurt Copain says, could ICET be another initiative with no significant success like DTTI or groupings such as IPF or Quad that haven't been a deterrent for China as far as Indian interests are concerned? And also there's a lot of mention in both the fact sheet, the White House fact sheet on, you were talking about implementation, right? In terms of laws, regulations, export restrictions and controls that the US will need to work on possibly.
So I think those are factors because in terms of some of the comments I heard from industry, one of the constraints in expanding cooperation in these areas have been some of the regulations and laws in the US. So as the US seeks to expand cooperation, they'll need to change those laws and regulations. So again, a message coming out from the US National Security Council and part of the White House, that they see this as an important area of cooperation, that they bless this, is a message to the US establishment, different ministries, including Congress, that they need to relook at these areas. So I think those would be next steps to be followed up. Again, the US industry believes that on the Indian side also, there may need to be relook at some of the rules, regulation, processes, some of the taxes and other schemes, some infrastructure constraints. So again, if the Indian government wants to take forward these proposals, they may need to take a look whether some of those would need to be addressed. So I think both sides would need to do work in these areas and see any changes that might be required to advance cooperation.
Slightly away from the topic, but I mean, India, Pakistan have not been hyphenated for a long time, but Indian Tide says, does Pakistan become unimportant in our discussions with the US?
Well, it is not unimportant, but I think Pakistan is one area where we don't always fully agree with the position that the US takes. Again, we have to understand that no country takes decisions to help another country as such. Each country takes decisions based on its own perceptions of its national interest. And where there is convergence, you work together. Where you don't have convergence, well, you go your separate paths. Now, for example, on Russia, India does not agree with the US. And therefore, India has not gone along with whatever the US says. Now, US sees certain equities in Pakistan because it wants to have access to a country that has nuclear weapons. It wants to have access to Pakistan to pursue some of its intelligence-related activity in Afghanistan, because all the US drones that fly over Afghanistan have to transit Pakistan to get there. And one of those was used to kill Ayman Zawahiri. So US needs that access. So they have a certain need for links with Pakistan, access to Pakistan. And therefore, although they've been very critical of the support that terrorism and terrorists get in Pakistan, they will not be 100% aligned with how India sees issues related to Pakistan. But on China, there is greater convergence in terms of how both countries see the China challenge, and therefore not full convergence, but greater convergence. And therefore, based on that, the US is willing to widen the space for areas of cooperation with India. And India has to see how it wants to utilize that opportunity. Because again, going back in history, the reason the United States deepened its cooperation with China, starting, let's say, 1971, particularly 1980, because they wanted to sharpen the Sino-Soviet split. And they wanted to strengthen China to deal with the challenge from the Soviet Union. And China utilized that opportunity. And today, China has emerged as a challenge to the US. And given that, now the US is reordering its relationships. And again, there is an opportunity there for India while preserving its own national interest in the process and its strategic autonomy.
There are reports now, a culmination of, well, in the short term at least, of the relationship, possibly in the summer, June, July. Prime Minister Modi may make a state visit. The dates apparently are free on both sides. The Congress will be in session, so it will be a joint session. How do you see that if that fructifies?
So right now, I mean, there's no confirmation, official confirmation, but there are reports. But if that fructifies, clearly, again, a signal that the US values the relationship with India and wants to sustain a high level of continued engagement, because you've had this meeting of the national security advisors leading to the decisions related to critical and emerging technologies. And within the next couple of months, for example, the 2+2 meeting of the foreign and defense ministers of both sides is likely to happen. The US Commerce Secretary is also scheduled to visit India in March for taking forward dialogue on economic and technological cooperation. There will also be a meeting of the CEOs Forum. And then there was a question, Amitabh, related to Blinken's visit to China over the weekend and whether the US was sending mixed signals. I think what US has been saying, and that's their position, we just have to note it for that they see China as the primary challenge and that they have entered into a stage of fierce competition with China. But at the same time, they want to maintain regular communication with China so that the competition does not lead to conflict. And that is the approach they're taking, especially given the experience they've had now recently with Russia.
A quick last question from our viewer. When you're talking about critical military technologies, wants to know what about thermonuclear warheads, nuclear submarines, hypersonic cruise missiles, rather than just lip service?
So US law prohibits cooperation with any country related to nuclear weapons technology. So we should factor that in. And there are many ways to strengthen your national security and your defense strength beyond just focusing on the nuclear.
Ambassador Arun Singh, absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. Even if it was online, next time we will do one in person on camera. Thank you so much for your time, your experience, and your expertise.
Thank you, Amitabh. I enjoyed the conversation.
Pleasure's all ours, Ambassador. And a reminder to our viewers that there is a UPI payment ID QR code that will flash on your screen, or the link is given in the YouTube descriptor. If you would like to help us or support us financially, you can also leave your comments, questions, and feedback, as well as join our Telegram channel for updates on what we put up both on our website and on our YouTube channel. This is The Talking Point on Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Brevi.